energy, I see it's written in the stars. We can go wherever, so let's do it now or never, baby. Nothing's ever too far. Glitter in the sky, glitter in our eyes, shining just the way we are. I feel like we're forever every time we get together, but whatever, let's get lost on Mars. You want me, I want you, baby. My sugar boo, I'm levitating. The Milky Way, we're renegading. Yeah, 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 yeah. I got you, moonlight. You're my starlight. I need you all night. Come on, dance with me. I'm levitating. You, moonlight. You're my starlight. I need you all night. Come on, dance with me. I'm levitating. You can fly away with me tonight. So you can fly away with me tonight. Baby, let me take you for a ride. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm levitating. You can fly away with me tonight. So you can fly away with me tonight. Baby, let me take you for a ride. Yeah, 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 yeah. My love is like a rocket, watch it blast off. And I'm feeling so electric, dance on our song. And even if I wanted to, I can't stop. Yeah, 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 yeah. My love is like a rocket, watch it blast off. And I'm feeling so electric, dance my ass off. And even if I wanted to, I can't stop. Yeah, 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 yeah. You want me, I want you, baby. My sugar boo, I'm levitating. The Milky Way, we're renegading. I got you, moonlight. You're my starlight. I need you all night. Come on, dance with me. I'm levitating. You can fly away with me tonight. You can fly away with me tonight. Baby, let me take you for a ride. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm levitating. You can fly away with me tonight. You can fly away with me tonight. Baby, let me take you for a ride.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are connecting from today. Please let us know where that is. Just post it in the chat. Let us know where you are connecting from this morning for us and whatever the time of the day it is for you. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of our Hacking HR live chat series. We started this series at the beginning of the year, and I have had I've been very lucky, and I've had an amazing amount of incredible conversations with some of the most brilliant people ever. And it's been super exciting to be able to do this for our community. And one thing that I want to tell you is that even though we are Hacking HR and our community is mainly HR people, you will find that a lot of these conversations, once again, like I always say at the beginning of my of the shows, maybe they are not directly connected with the work that you are doing in HR, maybe directly connected with the work that you're doing in HR. But the reality is that it is connected. And you will find out through the conversation, you will find out that the connections are there, and that when we engage in these kinds of conversations outside of the realm of HR, but you connect the dots between what you do in HR and what we're talking about, those strong connections can make you better in the job that you do. So I'm hoping that you're finding a lot of value out of these conversations. They are live. And if you have missed any of the previous conversations that we've had, just go to our website, hackinghr.io, and click on live chats, and you will find there all of the previous live chats that we've had in the show. So a lot of great stuff in there. So we're going to be talking about today about social media, polarization, political polarization, how that's trickling into our organizations, and particularly what can we do within our organizations to manage sort of the impact of polarizing social media, breaking the prism of social media. And I am excited to welcome my guest today, Chris, breaking the social media prism. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited about the conversation, and I would love for you to please let us know about who you are. If you can introduce yourself to our community, let us know about the work you've done and why you wrote this book on social media, on political polarization, breaking the social media prism. So please go ahead, Chris.
Sure. I'm a professor of sociology, public policy, and political science at Duke University, and I direct a group called the Polarization Lab here. We are a group of data scientists, social scientists, who are trying to both diagnose why political polarization and incivility happens, even on places like LinkedIn these days,
Mm.
and how to fix it. So we not only do research, but we also build tools that anyone can use to try to push back against polarization.
Oh, that's fantastic, and I can't wait to hear more about the work that you're doing. Now, tell me about the book, "Breaking the Social Media Prism." Tell us about what the book is about and why you wrote that book, and specifically with the lens on social media.
Yeah, I wrote this book because I'm worried about the direction of our country and
Mm,
our inability to get things done. We hear a lot of stories about social media and why it's become so uncivil, such a frustrating place to be for so many of us. And about 5 years ago, I was one of those people who thought, there's probably some easy explanations to why social media polarizes us. Like, we often hear about the idea of the echo chamber.
mm,
This is the idea where, if I'm on LinkedIn, if I'm on Twitter, wherever, I tend to only connect with people who already share my view. And then I start to hear the same things. And then before you know it, I can't even listen to the other side. I
yeah,
don't even know what they're talking about.
yeah.
And so then when we come together in those rare instances where we come together, things get heated quickly. And so in some of our first research in our polarization lab at Duke University, we wanted to try to test that idea. And we did an experiment that had some surprising results.
Are you gonna tell us about those results?
Yeah, that was quite a teaser, wasn't
I
it?
was waiting for
Yeah.
that.
So, we wanted to see what would happen if you took people outside their echo chamber.
Mm,
So, this isn't something that most people do, right? Most people, they're happy to kind of stay with their side. They listen to the same things, everything's familiar, everything's good. And what we did in 2017 is we offered a large group of Twitter users some money if they would spend a month following a bot that eventually they would come to learn would expose them to one message an hour from the other side. So if they're a Democrat, they get messages from Republicans, Fox News, advocacy groups that are associated with the right in the United States, or sort of conservative politics. And if they were on the right, then they would hear from American liberal channels like CNN, um, elected leaders like for example Joe Biden. And what we were hoping, of course, is that exposing people to those on the other side would make them less polarized, but what we found was exactly the opposite.
mm.
So we found that on average, most people become more polarized, not less, when they participated in our experiment to step outside their echo chamber for 1 month.
Wow. And why was that? What was the explanation of why they were more polarized? Because that's counterintuitive to what we've all what we've heard for a long time, right? That getting people out of their echo chamber helps them, expand their minds.
Exactly, exactly. And it's such a strong narrative out there that it is surprising. It surprised me too. The answer, I think, is that much as we might like it to be a place for the competition of ideas where we come together and solve problems together, like so many early pioneers of the internet wanted us to think about social media, it's not.
Mm,
It's not that. If you look in this idea that sociology can that social media can create a competition of ideas, it's something that motivates people like Elon Musk, right, or Mark Zuckerberg, or before them Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter.
yeah.
We all have this idea that if you just connect people, that the better angels of the human spirit will prevail, right? And anybody who spends much time on social media, and you don't even need to go to a charged place like Twitter, you can be on LinkedIn and you can
Yeah.
see it in the comments, you can see it in Facebook, places
Yeah.
where most of us think we're going just to see cute cats or see pictures of each other's kids or something like that. And
Yeah.
instead we see this vitriol. So the question, I think, is why? And why, especially when we encounter the other side, do we become so angry? And the answer is complicated, but it's rooted deeply in how humans interact with technology. We
Mm,
think about social media is a place we're just going to sort of entertain ourselves, maybe get a little information. But really, what we're doing is we're learning about ourselves and what other people think about us.
Mm.
And that begs deeper questions about how the structure of social media incentivizes different types of behavior. So we've created, I believe, essentially an environment that rewards people for saying extreme things
Hmm.
and gives the vast majority of people who have more moderate views little incentive to share their views. And the result is that social media has become like a prism that refracts the most extreme parts of the continuum, the ideological spectrum, and makes moderates seem invisible.
Wow, that is powerful statement, and I have so many questions for you, but let me ask you this one first. Um, if you are a moderate on social media, and that's what you witness, right? You witness, this vitriol or uh, hate, whatever you want to call it, right? From one side and the other side. How can you think about the world, if that's what you're exposed to? Maybe because
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know. I don't know if you end up thinking I am wrong, or you end up becoming more polarized towards the side that you think makes more sense for you because you think that's how the world operates. It
Yeah.
operates in extremes. So how can you think about this from a moderate perspective?
Yeah, that's the danger, right? When the people we need most to speak up feel like they can't speak, right? And
Yeah.
that's the environment that social media has created. One of the reasons why we think stepping outside your echo chamber makes people more polarized is that when you step outside your echo chamber, you are most likely to encounter an extremist from the other side, not a moderate. So, for example, let's take Twitter.
Wow.
About 6% of all Twitter users generate about 73% of all tweets about politics. And that
Wow.
6% of Twitter users, as you might not be surprised to learn, are either very conservative or very, very liberal, associated with the Democrat side or the Republican side, if we're talking about the US, though there's similar dynamics internationally. And what that means is the moderate who wanders outside their echo chamber doesn't have many experiences with the other side. Maybe they don't care about politics very much. Maybe like a lot of your listeners, or your audience, they want to avoid politics, right? They don't
Yeah.
want politics to avoid business or the goings on of their day, right? Um, but the problem is that when they wander outside their echo chamber, they're not having a pleasant conversation about a soccer game or a football match, right? They are going to see one of the most extreme people on the internet.
Yeah.
And the problem is that they may confuse that person with everyone else on the other side.
Mm.
And that's where the real danger
Mm.
comes in. And that's where social media becomes more like a prism,
Mm.
where the real problem is when all this becomes fulfilling prophecy, right? We begin to
Yeah.
impute the attitudes of the other side based on
Yeah.
what we've seen from a small group of
Yeah,
extremists.
I'm guilty of that, by the way. I have to say,
Oh, we all are. Yeah.
yeah, it's um, one thing that I know a lot of us have, even when we're guilty of that, is the awareness that we're doing something that is not right. I think is the awareness of knowing I am lumping everybody in the same bucket, right? And I know they are not all. There are extremist people on all sides, but not everybody's like that. But it's just so hard to sort of like unwire or rewire that thinking that you have in your mind of, if this person represents the political party, then all of them are like that. Therefore, I don't want to talk to them, right? When they oppose your views. And that's so hard. But now let me ask you this. I live in the state of Arizona, and this state is divided literally in half politically, right? Maybe a tiny bit more liberal now, 0.05%. But that hate, that vitriol that you're talking about, that I see on social media, because I see it on social media, I go out on the streets and I don't live it all the time. I don't experience it all the time. So did we give ourselves permission to be hateful on social media, but have like another face in real life? What's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we did in the research for this book, Breaking the Social Media Prism, is we not only did large experiments with thousands of people, using the tools of data science and AI, but we also talked to people. We went
Mm.
out and talked to people before and after they were following these bots that we created that exposed them to the other side. And, this was actually one of the most revealing parts of the entire research program. And here's why. The people we present online are totally different than the people we are offline a lot of the time. So let me give you some examples. We met this man, I'll call him Ray just to protect his identity. But, Ray is sort of a middle-aged guy, works in a business in the Northeast of the US. Really pleasant guy when you talk to him, just likes to go out of his way to say, like, I try to keep politics out of it. I don't like to get people worked up, I like to keep it civil, goes out of his way to explain that he's not racist, this, that, and the other. Then later that week, we're merging the data from that interview with the data that we collected from his Twitter profile. And this is the biggest troll I've ever seen on the internet in studying social media for 15 years. I mean, the guy is up till like 3 a.m. every night because we can see the timestamps of when he's posting stuff, posting the most unspeakably horrific memes of principally like liberal leaders like, Barack Obama, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in just terrible ways. And so the question is, why does someone do that? Why on earth would you stay up till 3 a.m. doing this? And when we pulled back the curtain, started to learn more about him, we interviewed him again. We followed him for a number of months. And what we discovered is this guy, Ray, turns from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde each night because social media has created a kind of refuge for him.
Yeah.
He's a conservative guy. He lives in a liberal city. He works in a liberal profession. And, he doesn't have a great life. He's living with his mom, he's single and he's in his, he's in his 40s. And, he doesn't have a lot of ways of getting respect during the day. He just wants what everybody wants, really, which is a sense of self-worth. He wants other people to like him, right? And so he goes online and he starts to notice that, the more crazy stuff he says about Democrats, the more likes, the more follows. Those dopamine hits that we all experience when we get engagement on social media, right? It literally makes him turn into a different person every night. And, I wish I could tell you this is just the story of one strange guy.
Yeah.
But this story comes up again and again in our data, not just among conservatives, but among liberals too.
Well, yeah. That's just out of curiosity. In this case, couple of questions. Does he use his own name, in the handle of their in his social media handles, or does he use like an alter ego name in those social media handles?
Yeah, he does use an alternate name. Although maybe we can come back to this later. Anonymity, we think, is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it enables this kind of unspeakable human behavior that we'd never see in real life, but it also has some advantages. I hope we'll have time to come back to that later.
Wow, that's fantastic to just see the connection there, right? And the other question is, did you ever confront him and ask him, why are you this way in your real life, and why are you this so different way? Because it's not just a little different; it's radically different from his real life. Do you confront him in that case?
Yeah, as researchers, we don't think it's our job to try to change people's minds.
Yeah.
We're really out to try to figure out what motivates people. We leave it to other people to make those decisions, right? So we worried that if we confronted him, that it would change the type of data we get, right? He'd give some kind of preserving story about why he does it or something like that. And we knew that, especially tracking him over many months and through multiple points of view, right? Not just what he tells us in person, but tracking him on multiple social media platforms online, we knew we could learn a lot. So people tend not to be able to explain why they do strange things like this, right? If they did, my job as a sociologist would be a lot easier. But it's not just, and again, it's not just Ray, and it's not just extremists either. So let me offer another story, if I may. We were talking about moderates earlier, right? And one of the people who I read about in this book, Breaking the Social Media Prism, is a woman I call Maria. And Maria's, a really interesting person. She's she's in her mid 30s. She lives on the East Coast of the US. And she's got a great family. She's got a great job. She's got a great marriage. Sort of has it all, She leans to the right. She's, her dad was a cop. She grew up in New York City. And, she basically is motivated by like handgun issues, right? She wants people to have freedom to own handguns, And one night she tells us, she's on Twitter and she sees a post by the National Rifle Association, the group that advocates for gun rights in the US. And they're saying something pretty anodyne in the landscape of America's, gun debate, which is something just like, it's everybody's right to own a gun. Whatever your beliefs, she was a little bit appalled by the way that principally liberals were responding to this tweets, attacking people's, constitutional right to own a gun. So she just says something pretty simple like, hey, my husband owns a gun. He's got a license. He visits a local firing range. And I think that's his right. That's all she says. Mm-hmm. She says 2 minutes later, commentators had been to her timeline, saw that she had kids and posted, "We hope your kids find your gun and shoot you." And let me tell you, if anybody, anyone who has kids, anytime anybody says anything threatening about your kids, you're going to pull back, and now imagine, you're walking this tightrope, right? Where for her, she's actually she's actually a pretty moderate conservative. She even reads the New York Times. She has really important and underreported views on things like race and policing that I personally believe could actually create a productive conversation. But you will never hear her talk about politics online because of experiences like this, right?
Wow.
Because when she wades into the fray, she gets attacked by the extremists, not only on the other side, but on her own side too.
Wow, that is, it's painful. It's painful that social media, I don't, it's not that I don't think that these things don't happen in real life, but the fact that we, again, I go back to what I said before, we gave ourselves permission to have that refuge in social media, whether with anonymity or without anonymity, with our real names in there. But now we just find that that we are allowed to say, unspeakable, horrible things like that. And nothing happens to us because there's no responsibility. You can say something like that, "I hope your kids, find a gun and shoot you." And nothing will ever come back to you except on social media to say that was wrong. And that's, to me, is so dangerous. Let me ask you this. This is just out of curiosity for my own sake, actually, for my own sanity's sake, so to speak. But from the people that you think are, behave in real life with moderation, with respect, with tolerance to those on the other side, how many of them do you, how many of those that are on social media doing and writing horrible things, how many of them do you think are like that in real life? Do you have an idea, percentage-wise, of how many of those really extremist, hateful people on social media are like that in real life?
Yeah, I mean, the good news here is that these people are the exception, not the rule. I mean, there's this narrative. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. There's this narrative out here that, social media is making all of us more and more radical every day, that algorithms are reinforcing it, that misinformation is making it worse, that echo chambers are making it worse. And, though there's a lot of bad news out there, and I would never say that social media companies don't deserve a lot of blame for the current situation, the good news is that those people are still the exception to the rule. And so one of the most important things that I think everyone can do is learn that you vote with your like button. We used to say you vote with your wallet, meaning, if you don't like what a company is doing, don't buy their products. Same thing on social media, right? Every time I like something or comment on something, even if I'm angry about something and saying, I don't like what you're saying, I am effectively saying, more of this, please. Right.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the time when we see, crazy message spreading across the internet, it's not just because of that extremist. It's because of all the non-extremists sort of pushing back. They think they're sort of protecting the landscape, but they're actually increasing the spread of this stuff. And we know why this is. It's because to some degree, most social media platforms, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, they all reward engagement. So the more engagement you get, the better. And that's because at root, all social media platforms were set up for advertising to help people go viral, right? The whole point is to get tons of eyeballs. But there's no thinking, careful thinking, especially about what kind of eyeballs we want on what kind of message. And the sad thing is with technology, we know we can incentivize better forms of human behavior. And rather than trying to stamp out that tiny group of extremists, which by the way is about a $5 billion industry, Facebook alone spends $1 billion a year on such content moderation, right? It's a game of whack-a-mole, right? We're continuing to try to get rid of the bad guys, and it doesn't really work. And sometimes it might even make it worse, we think. So the bigger question is, especially for professionals like your audience, right? People who are trying to keep it clean, especially on a place like LinkedIn, where we used to think, oh, well, polarization won't happen on LinkedIn because, everybody's got a job and they don't want to get into politics. But obviously we've seen this is not the case. So the big question is, how do we reward more productive kinds and civil kinds of behavior that I think, according to survey data, the vast majority of people want, right? We don't want the bad stuff to go viral. We want useful, positive stuff to go viral, but that's just not what's happening.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned LinkedIn. I'm a heavy LinkedIn user, and I've been in the platform for 10 years now. And especially when they transitioned from being a job board to becoming a content platform, which happened in 2014 or around 2014. And ever since, I've been a heavy LinkedIn user. And I've noticed a tiny bit more of political content on LinkedIn. Not a lot. It's not Twitter or Facebook, but there's a little bit more. But what's interesting is this, that when somebody posts something political, you get a lot of this content or comments, of people saying this is not the right place for this. And that makes me think that there's some level of awareness of the impact that content could have in a platform like LinkedIn. So is there a way to bring that same level of awareness to, for example, Facebook or Twitter or something, and saying, you comment on that and you are helping the algorithm to say this is good content, I'm going to replicate it more. But is there a way to create that a similar level of awareness, so to speak, in other social media platforms?
I'm a little more pessimistic on this point. So I think you're right. Like, the reason LinkedIn is a little more civil is because there's a point, right? We're all on LinkedIn to share professional news, to connect with people. We have a purpose for using LinkedIn, right? Let me ask you, what's the purpose of Twitter? What's the purpose of Facebook, right? None of us can answer that question, right? Is some people say, well, the point of Twitter is not to be the main character and get canceled every day, right? That's not, why would you want to play that game, right? Or Facebook, what are we doing? Yeah, maybe we can connect with that, weird friend from high school. Is that really what we all want to be doing with our lives, right? The point is, all of these platforms, evolved from very sort of strange esoteric purposes. We all know the story of Facebook, right? Evolved out of a site that was used for college students to rate each other's physical attractiveness, and now we're expecting that to help people find professional connections, right? Or save democracy, right? Instagram was originally called Bourbon because it was used to facilitate alcohol-centric gatherings. TikTok. Right?
I didn't know that.
Neither did I until I started the research for this book, right? So it begs the question, like, what is the point of any of our big platforms? I think LinkedIn's an exception. There is a point, right? Or maybe, like Pinterest, you've got hobbies, but we should expect social media to devolve into a kind of leaderless demagoguery if there is no point, right? So part of the prescription, I think, for future social media platforms, because I think Facebook and Twitter are a dying breed. We need only look back 15 years to say, remember, there was a headline in the Guardian, the UK newspaper, will anybody ever supplant MySpace's monopoly on the social media sector, right? My college students don't even know what MySpace is, right? I can barely remember, right? So, if you don't like social media, wait a few years, right? So the question is, what's coming, and will there be more purposive platforms, that orient us around certain things, things that are useful, things that are helpful, rather than incentivizing this kind of extremism, which is what we're all sort of mindlessly doing right now.
Yeah. You mentioned before, when you were talking about Ray, you talked about him behaving this way because of a matter of potentially self-worth, right?
Hmm.
Meaning, he's not finding that worth in life, in real life, and then he's trying to find it with an alternative identity
Hmm.
on social media. So in real life, right? How do we avoid the same effect? I know extremism is still, that's minority, but we get some of these views in the workplace, right? We have
Hmm.
some of this hate in the workplace now. I don't know if you've seen it, but I think in the past couple of years, there have been like 3 or 4 shootings where employees that are disgruntled or upset at something, they go to their workplaces and they shoot everybody, right?
Right.
And so that extremism, those views, maybe it's not a lot, it's not in a lot of cases, but it happens to impact real life at work. What can we do
Yeah.
then at work, and especially for people who work in HR, to separate these two worlds, right? If that.
Yeah. So I'm a social media expert, so I'll only speak to what you can do on social media. But
Mm.
one thing you can do is try to disrupt what we call the false consensus effect. So, if you see a lot of extremists on the internet, right, they tend to interact with other extremists a lot. The more that you interact with other extremists, the more you come to think those extreme views are actually pretty normal, right?
Mm.
Because everybody around you seems normal. And you don't get some kind of digital report that tells you, oh, 66% of Americans think this or 70% of French people think this, right? You just see, oh, 30 people liked my post. This must have been a common or
Mm.
likable idea, right? And so we all know that when extreme ideas sort of go unchallenged, right? That that's gonna allow this kind of false consensus effect to happen, right? So we need more moderates to speak up. We need them to, even if they're not making a strong claim, like you're wrong and here's why. It's just like, here's another view.
Yeah.
Here's another way of thinking about this. Um, you know, Most of those people feel like, what, it's not worth it, not worth my time. But if we don't act, we allow those types of loud voices to dominate the conversation. So there's things that people can do, leaders inside organizations can do, be a good example.
Yeah.
But there's also deeper questions about which kind of social media you're going to use and to what purpose, right? Encourage your employees to think about what they're getting out of social media, right? If all we're doing on there is yelling at each other, it has very little business purpose, right? But it doesn't have to be that way, right? When I was saying earlier, algorithms reward engagement. There are different things that an algorithm can reward, and we can lobby places like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter to reward those. So let me give you an example. Right now, we're seeing the loudest person gets the most attention.
Yeah.
What if instead of incentivizing engagement, the algorithm rewarded people for saying things that lots of different types of people like? This is something we call a bridging algorithm in the Duke Polarization Lab. So try to boost the ideas that are consensus building rather than
Mm.
those that stoke the fire. Now you might say, okay, it's like kumbaya, we're all around a campfire. That's great, Professor Bale. That's never going to happen. Well, guess what? 2 years ago, we convinced Twitter to try it, and Twitter tried it as part of their, crowdsourced misinformation program. It used to be called Birdwatch. And what they found is when they used this algorithm, misinformation got shared about 25 to 35% less. And this
Wow.
is one of the few innovations that has survived the Elon Musk transition, I think, or I'd like to think, because it works.
Yeah.
And you may be thinking, okay, yeah, but it's just like, who really cares about stopping misinformation? In terms of like, are normal people sort of motivated to go look for misinformation? No. But remember, content moderation, trying to stamp out that tiny group of angry people, $1 billion a year for Facebook. So if you can eat into 25 to 35% of that, and try to, instead of pushing back against this small group of people, incentivizing better behavior, right? If you give the carrot, right, if you want to go viral, you have to say things that lots of different people are going to like, right?
Yeah.
That creates a totally different dynamic, and it makes it a much less fun place for trolls to play. So we can't, snap our fingers and make Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we can teach ourselves, right? We used to have, unfortunately, when I was just mentioning the Musk transition, we used to have tools on polarizationlab.com, which is a free resource anyone can use to try to educate themselves to become a more reflective social media user, learn about the ways that it incentivizes extremism. Also, kind of monitor how your own behavior is projecting you towards the public. And one of the tools we created, we call the bipartisanship leaderboard. Until recently, we were able to track Twitter users to say whether or not their tweets were resonating across political divides. So you can get a flavor. We built bots that allowed people to simulate this new type of algorithm in their newsfeed. Again, unfortunately, those got shut down by, Elon Musk, who, as we start out the conversation, I mentioned, I think has the wrong idea of how social media works, right? It's not going to naturally produce the best ideas and a competition of ideas unless we curate it, unless we incentivize it. So for HR directors, for leaders of organizations, I think the question is, when you talk about how social media is going to advance people's careers, remind them that there's lots of different types of people listening. And even if they say something that gets a lot of, approbation from one side, just because it's a lot of likes doesn't mean it's actually producing consensus. And to the extent that so many of us want to get beyond the political divides, we need to be mindful and learn to reach those new audiences in ways that are productive.
Yeah, which is already in itself really hard, I guess. It's just becoming more aware and whatnot. Chris, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you one last question. What's your take, if you have a take, or if you have seen something on the research, when brands voice a stance on something, right? And I'm talking about the Ben and Jerry kind of things, right? I mean, when you are openly saying, we are pro-diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and we believe in justice, we believe in social justice and in the environment. What have you seen when brands take that stance? Which generally, by the way, it's I see more happening on companies that lean more liberal, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's a question of audience. Who are you trying to impress? I think if you look at the recent examples with Bud Light and or going all the way back to say Colin Kaepernick and Nike, right? This is not an issue that's going away. The brands are going to be navigating these political minefields constantly. I think it's a difficult question, right? Every company is going to have a different set of ideals that motivates them, a different audience. Companies that know their audiences are going to be making much better decisions in this space than others. But I think overall, the other thing is when we enter these spaces, we have less control over where our content is seen. If you put up a ad about I don't know, everybody kind of getting along together and it runs alongside a grenade exploding in Russia right now, right? That's a reality that advertisers and recruiters and everyone else in business is facing, right? So I couldn't offer like a one size fits all answer to this question. I think it's just so specific to the goals of the organization and their audience. But I do think it's tracking it, right? How is it? How is it having the impact? That's the tricky part, right? Because if you launch a campaign, you get a lot of negative feedback. Well, it might be that a lot of people loved it, but it just turns out that on social media, they don't have much. Just like Maria, the woman who was harassed for her views about gun control, they don't have a lot of reason to tell you that they like it, right? And so these are the tough things. How do you identify that? You need a lot of market research, I'm afraid, these days.
Yeah, and there was the Edelman barometer, I think it was 3 years ago, saying that people are expecting their brands to take a stance on social issues now.
Yeah.
And of course, what I'm guessing is some of these brands know that in doing so, they lose a little bit of their market, but they double down on the rest of it, right? Which becomes so much more loyal.
Yeah. And, one thing we've discovered at Duke, Duke has an initiative, Fuqua School of Business, on bringing business leaders to solve polarization. Why? Because, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which you just mentioned, one of the groups that people trust the most is business leaders, right? So
Correct.
there's a role there. There's an important role.
Correct.
So, especially in an environment where people don't trust politicians, they don't trust tech leaders, they don't trust academics like me, right? So
scientists.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a big role there.
Media.
And yeah, exactly. And it's a responsibility, right? But it's also an opportunity,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, business has a way of getting things done. So is it going to be easy? Are there going to be tricky circumstances like Disney navigating the situation in Florida? That's a tough one. There's going to be a lot of tough ones. We need a generation of leaders in business, I think, who can speak across divides and who can create an environment where speaking across divides is something that we all value. That's the part that's bad right now, right? There's no incentive to speak across divides, right? Every step you take is scrutinized. We need to create an environment where people get rewarded for doing stuff that brings us together. And I think business is really good at that. And it's one of the few areas that gives me hope these days.
Yeah. Well, I said that the last one was the last question, but this is really the last question. And
no problem.
I think it's a tough one, but just say a sentence about it, right? Do you think we are as divided as it seems in the media? When you look at people's social media, but you also look at their personal real lives, do you think we are as divided about everything as it seems?
No.
When we read the media.
I mean, more good news here, and if this is a great way to end, because I think it's the most important message. We are not as polarized as everyone thinks we are. In fact, researchers have a name for this phenomenon. We call it false polarization. We all overestimate the ideological extremity of the other side and underestimate the ideological extremity of our own side. It's a kind of basic human bias, right?
Yeah.
And the mass media, the more we've done studies, experiments where people are shown newspaper articles that say polarization is so bad. Sure enough, those articles make people think polarization is bad. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say there aren't real problems. Of course there are. But if you look at the data on, perception versus reality, you'll find time and again that people wildly overestimate how different they are from the other side and completely underestimate how many bits of low-hanging fruit there are. Most Americans agree about universal background checks for handguns, right? A lot of people are concerned about incentivizing green energy, right? There's a lot of areas where there's an opportunity. And, the problem is social media, we've created the perfect tool to increase the gap between perception and reality. And what we all need to be doing is learning how to pull it back. And that's why I called my book Breaking the Social Media Prism, because we need to break this tool that distorts our perception of reality.
Yeah. Well, thank you for ending on that positive note, because I think it's an optimistic view of the fact that we can, yes, we have problems, but they are not unsurmountable. And, there are things that we can do, to fix them by getting together and solving them. So, Chris, thank you so much for spending this time with me, with our community, and sharing about your book, Breaking the Social Media Prism. And I can't wait to hear more about the research you're doing at the Polarization Lab.
No problem. Thanks, Enrique. I look forward to keeping in contact with you and the rest of your audience.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. See you soon. Thank you. Bye, Chris.